treaty signed in 2003 and that came into force in 2007. Awaiting extradition to the US is Mike Lynch, accused of defrauding Hewlett-Packard by inflating the value of Autonomy, a company he sold to the US giant. His extradition was approved by the Home Secretary in January, but paused while he seeks leave to appeal. I spoke to Mr. Lynch earlier.
The thing that really moved me this morning was listening to Harry Dunn's mother, and the process that she's been going through is really highlighting the difference between the two sides of the treaty. So Hans Sekulas, despite actually admitting that she committed a crime, has not come to the UK, and we're in a situation where American interests have prevailed, and she's been told that she doesn't have to come. If you contrast that with the situation any of your listeners are in the UK, if the US requests an extradition of any British citizen in the UK, they don't need to have had any connection with America. They are basically default extradited. And that's a situation where they're taken from their homes, moved over to the US. They may be in the US for 2 or 3 years before a trial even happens, if it even does. Some of that time they may even be in jail. And the treaty that we have with the US means that there is no protection for that citizen. It's almost impossible for a judge or the Home Secretary to stop that happening.
If you are the US authorities and you want to get a UK citizen extradited, you have to show reasonable suspicion. It's not just sending a form in saying, we want Mike Lynch and we want him now.
No, that's exactly the point. There is no test that's done in the UK before you're sent of whether there is reasonable suspicion. The oddity here...
The authorities in the US have to show it to the UK?
No, they don't.
Right.
There's no test in the UK. So, in fact, a great irony here is that a US prosecutor has more power over you than your local bobby. There's no process in the UK where the actual merits of the case, even at the most basic, what lawyers would call prima facie level, is tested.
You would still have to be tried in the US. You're not just being extradited and thrown in the slammer, are you?
Well, two things. You are extradited and thrown in the slammer because usually people that are extradited don't get bail in the US. So whether there's a trial or not, you may well end up in jail for 2 years. The sad thing about this is while I've been on this journey, I've come across lots of families who are in this position. The first thing that happens is just in handling the administration of the legal fees, you end up losing your house to pay the bills. Then you can be extradited. You can sit in a US jail for sometimes years, and then there might be a trial. And when we get to that point, there's all sorts of questions about how those trials work. So we've seen trials where witnesses who would come from the UK are threatened that they'll be arrested if they come to the US. So the reason that we need sovereignty here is when it is something that is definitely a UK matter, just like every other country in the world, we need to sort it out in the UK. And one thing I think it's really important to understand is this isn't just about the big cheeses and the sort of guy at the top and all this sort of stuff. The way the US works is it does what's called a roll-up model of plea bargaining. So one of the things that's been an eye-opener for me is finding, ordinary people. If you're listening to this out there and you work in the accounts department of a UK company, you are at risk if that company gets into a dispute with a US company, or even it just touches the US because one transfer goes through a US bank. The US can assert jurisdiction in their mind. They can issue an extradition request and you'll be extradited.
You have been putting this case, your case, for some time now to the government about this unbalanced treaty. Do you get any sense that anyone is listening and is prepared to try and renegotiate it or act in any way?
I think the situation is across all parties. There's a very strong understanding and agreement that this is unjust. So there's great support for changing this. The thing all came about through a mistake. The Americans told us they were going to sign the same piece of paper, and then the Senate stopped them because they were going to protect their citizens. So I think there's great support for changing it. What it is, it's about standing up a little bit to the US and saying, no, let's be fair here. We'll have the same deal in both directions. And coming back to Harry Dunn's mother, I don't know if you saw her on the news last night, but she talked about this exact point, which is we sometimes feel we have to pander to the US and we act a little bit like their lapdog. Well, what we need to have is a relationship here which has mutual respect, and it's not optional. We're not going to have a stock exchange. We're not going to be able to have companies. And we do need to protect our citizens from this because more and more we're seeing this weaponization of the American Department of Justice in American interests. And the one thing you've got to hand it to the Americans in the Sekulas case, they didn't beat about the bush. She didn't come because it was against American interests.
If the rules do change, would it be a retrospective change? Would it affect your situation?
No, the reason I'm here today is not my situation. If the Prime Minister stood up in the House of Parliament today and ripped up this treaty, it will make no difference to me. But what it will do is make a lot of difference to families I've met that are in the process, and there will be people in the future where this is happening. And it's only getting worse. This is a treaty that was set up to deal with terrorists, and it's being applied all the time now in things which are commercial matters. So it needs to be fixed.
Mike Lynch. The government, for its part, insists there is no significant difference between the tests used in each country to decide who is extradited.